What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another War Thunder video. Today we're taking a look at some new battle ratings updates. Yeah, it's been a while. December 24th was the last time we had some battle ratings changes in aircraft. Today they announced new aircraft battle ratings and some new tanks battle ratings changes. I'm only going to cover the aircraft because, quite frankly, I'm not a tank guy. Those of you who have been on my channel for a while know that I'm more interested in the aircraft, and as far as tank BR changes, I just don't know enough about the tanks to offer any kind of insight and opinion. But I will include a link to the battle ratings changes for everything in the video description below. Today we're going to start off with the Americans. We got a couple of new changes here. First off, we're going to start with the bombers. The B-17G, which currently has a battle rating of 6.0 in realistic as well as simulator, will be going to a 6.3, and in arcade it'll be going from a 5.7 to a 6.0. I suspect this has mostly to do with the guns. For some strange reason, people have an affinity on getting onto this guy's tail. Fighters always just park themselves right behind a B-17, and they always die. Don't know why, but they always seem to think that the B-17 is easy to take down when in fact it's not. The B-17 doesn't have the unkillable tank-like durability that it used to, but its gunners are more than adequate in taking down any kind of fighter that happens to be stupid enough to park its ass right behind the B-17. Next up, the B-24D Liberator goes from 6.3 in both realistic and simulator to a 5.7. Now, I'm actually surprised by this, pleasantly surprised. I've flown the B-24 a number of times in the last couple of months, and it's always resulted in the same thing. You take 2 hits to either wing, and it basically rolls itself upside down and plummets to the earth. It's got a damage model that I'm not entirely convinced is proper, and quite frankly, it's just not very flyable in realistic battles. It's just not a whole lot of fun to take out. Next up, we got some Corsairs that are getting some updates. The F4UNA is going from a 3.0 in both realistic, actually all of them, in all modes, 3.0 in realistic, arcade, and sim to 3.3. I think that's a sensible change. The UMC version is the same, 3.3, so that'll be a welcome change. It's necessary. Meanwhile, the 1D goes from a 3.3 to a 3.7 in both realistic and sim, while in arcade it goes from 3.0 to a 3.3. It makes sense. It's a better version of the 1A, so it's a logical difference, a logical change. Now, the next one is the Hellcat. Everyone knows that this thing was under-tiered for the longest of times. It goes from a 3.0 to a 3.7. It's still not as high as the British version, which doesn't make a lick of sense to me if you're talking about just about plain performance. The British version is 4.0, which is where this thing should be. But what I think happens, what I think skews the numbers that Gaijin uses for their analytics, is the Hellcat is always squatted up with various Spitfires, and I think the British teams tend to win more matches because of that. The Spitfires are a very easy to fly plane normally. They're very easy to fly by a rookie pilot, and so it tends to make Hellcat win percentages greater than, say, the American Hellcat. So I think that tends to skew the numbers for a Gaijin, and that's why this still won't be up to the battle rating of the British version. Next up is the highly questionable Tiger Cat. The F7F1 currently has a battle rating of 6.0. It's actually going up to all the way up to a 6.7. Holy shit. on let's see, on December 24th, this thing had a battle rating of 5.7 and went to a 6.0. And now it's going from a 6.0 to 6.7. That is a hell of a jump. And why, I'm not entirely sure. My various flights with this have been generally favorable. However, I'm not entirely sure I'm not convinced that it's worth a 7 or a 6.7. A 6.7, you're going to be up against a variety of very good jets. You know, that mid-tier or that mid-level of jets. You'll be going up against 262s and I believe vampires or venoms. Let me see. Yes, yeah, vampires 7.7, but that's getting a change. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Venom is 7.7. A Venom is capable of going over 1,000 kilometers an hour. Yeah, rip Tiger Cat. I don't know if this is even going to be a problem because, quite frankly, going up to a 6.7 battle rating, I'm not entirely sure how many people are even going to continue flying the Tiger Cat. I think Gaijin, by going to a 6.7, has basically killed this plane. Not intentionally, mind you. But, my god. I think if they're going to give it an update, I think a 6.3 would be fine. Because it's a better plane than, say, the J7W1, which is the plane that I tend to think of as sort of being its equivalent. But J7W1 isn't quite as good. The Tiger Cat tends to climb a lot better. It doesn't turn very well, but neither does the G7W1. They're both energy fighters and boom and zoomers. But yeah, this is a 6.7. That's going to be an interesting thing to see. I suspect that it'll eventually get reduced to a 6.3. But wow. Now keeping in mind that these battle range changes don't go into effect until tomorrow. So the changes that were introduced today on the forum are just kind of teasers or a preview of what's to come. Things may change. Next up, we'll go to Germany. The Arado, the mighty Arado with no guns, only bombs, goes from a 6.7 to a 6.3. They could have lowered it all the way down to 6.0, and I think it would have been fine. The Arado is it's a small niche number of War Thunder pilots that use it. It's not very popular. It's an oddball of a plane, to be quite honest with you. Like, you can see here, I don't even have it researched. I don't own it. I have no intentions of buying it, unless maybe if we're going to do like a custom battle for, you know, a stream or something. Then we have the ME262A1U4. I believe this is also referred to as the narwhal version because it has a great big 50mm cannon on the front. Yeah, look at that big old thing. It's going from a 7.3 to a 6.7. Strangely enough, that's the only 262 that's getting a decrease in battle rating. There are a number of 262s. I'm actually surprised the A1 didn't get a decrease as well. Because this is the first ME262 that most people tend to buy. Because they get into this line of 109s, and they get the ME163, and they get this 262. With eventual plans to get the Canada Air Saber. But I would think that these ones would get a change as well, but not just the narwhal. But again, we don't know what Gaijin's analytics show. They've always been tight-lipped about what kind of statistics they have on various airplanes. I believe that's all the Germans. Yep. Russia. First one I saw was the Yak 1. This isn't an old plane. This is introduced in just a couple of patches ago, if I remember. Everyone thought 2.0 battle rating was ridiculous, and apparently Gaijin's statistics have proven that. It goes from a 2.0 to a 2.7. An obvious necessary, or it's a very necessary change. The early, all the early Russian aircraft have always been suspect for me. Because a lot of them have 2.0 or 2.3 battle ratings, and yet so many of them you know, except for the MiG-3s, tend to have cannons. And when you have a battle rating system that works the way this one does in War Thunder, you know, a 2.0 plane will go against planes that are between 1.0 and 3.0. So it's not uncommon for a 2.0 plane with a 20mm cannon to go up against a biplane, like say a Swordfish or what have you. You know what a 20mm cannon does to a biplane? It obliterates it. And that's what it's always got me a little questionable, or it's always made me questionable about some of the battle ratings on the early Russian planes, like the I-301, which is a gift, or it's a special plane that was released a while back, and it has a 23mm cannon, which is just ridiculous because you will face biplanes. You will destroy Key 10s. I'm sorry for the Key 10 pilots out there, but when you see a 301, you might as well just bail out of your plane. Seriously. Let's see what else we have. PE3s. This PE3 and the PE3 BIS, they go from a 3.3 to a 3.0. Excuse me, this PE3 goes from a 3.3 to a 3.0, while this one goes from a 3.7 to a 3.3. Now it's across the board changes. Arcade has a little bit different battle rating, but it's a similar change. I've never flown the regular PE3. I have flown the BIS. There's not a whole lot of difference. Heavy fighters are not very popular with me. These ones tend to be a little wonky to fly. I think I've tried this in a realistic, and it doesn't have much of a bomb load, so using it as a bomber is pretty difficult. And it doesn't have the ammo capacity to destroy a whole lot of soft targets, so I tend to ignore it. A lower battle rating is probably the right thing to do. I think I would say the best place to use these is an arcade, when you can just climb up and use it as a kind of like a Peshka. Next up, we have the British lineup. The first plane that caught my eye was the Mustang. The Mustang was an amazing plane to fly in arcade, from what I could gather from watching YouTubers as well as streamers back in the day. However, I've always been reluctant to buy this because in realistic it climbs very poorly, and even though it has 20mm Hispanos, 4 of them, it's always had a questionable battle rating. Right now the game says 4.7. In Gaijin's release notes, in the update release notes, it says it has a 5.0, but it actually has a 4.7. Well, it's getting reduced to a 4.3 in realistic and sim, while in arcade it's going from a 5.7 to a 5.0. I think the Mustang is going to have a comeback in realistic because of the Hispanos. I think you're going to have air targets available to you. Yeah, air targets. At a 4.3 battle rating, I think you're going to see this thing come back in force. Next up, we have the Vampire FB5. Current battle rating of 7.7. It's been down tiered to a 7.3. In arcade, it's 7.3 down to a 7.0. I've obviously never flown the Vampire. You can see it's grayed out here. But everything I could tell about this thing is it's always been just a slightly over tiered. It's not good enough to compete with some of the other fighters. So what I tend to find is Venoms usually end up dominating any match that the Vampire is in, because the Venom is so fucking fast. We're 1,000 kilometers an hour. A lot faster than the Vampire. Next up, Japan. What does Japan get? Nothing. Fuck Japan. Nothing changes. Nothing up tiered, down tiered, nothing. Which is actually surprising, because the R2Y2s are probably the only plane within Japan's lineup that actually need to be up tiered, whereas probably a third, maybe a quarter of the planes need to be down tiered. The A6Ms are obviously the ones that I'm thinking of. They need to be down tiered. I don't think that they are going to be down tiered anytime soon, because the battle range system, the way they work, it's how well planes do versus, or excuse me, how well other players do versus other players. What tends to happen is the A6M5s, getting into a turn fight with the, like a P51 or P63 or what have you, and Japan always wins, which is why the battle ratings for Japan have always gone up rather than down, whereas the Americans tend to go down because they lose. If you lose your plane, you usually have your battle ratings go down over time. So I don't see Japan getting their battle ratings going down anytime soon, because they win so many of the battle ratings, or they win so many of the turn fights. So Gaijin just doesn't feel like it's necessary to reduce the battle ratings, because the statistics pretty much speak for themselves. Players who turn fight zeros tend to lose. So those of us who fly Japan are pretty much stuck where we are. Still, their two Y2s need to be upgraded just a little bit, maybe to a 7.0. Anyway, guys, that about wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed this this little overview of today's battle ratings changes. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And as always, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Take care, guys.